This is the year 2018. Globally, the population is growing. The speed and the scale of urbanization are bringing big challenges to the cities, which require a forward thinking towards cities that do not only function today, but also tomorrow. Over the whole last century, there is an upwards trend in urbanization. Today, 54% of all people live in urban areas. By 2030, 1 in 3 people will live in cities with at least 500,000 inhabitants. This fast development raises fundamental questions which have to be tackled in the near future. How can growing cities stay well connected to transport systems? How can affordable housing be realized? How can pollution be reduced and a good microclimate preserved? Particularly for the nearly 1 billion urban poor housing in informal settlements, opportunities to achieve a higher life quality need to be created. Consuming 2/3 of the world's energy and accounting for more than 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, cities play a key role in tackling climate change. Therefore, sustainable urban development is of the utmost importance in order to preserve a livable micro and macroclimate on our planet. But firstly, let's take a step back. What do we actually mean with the excessively overused term sustainable development? In the words of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, sustainable development means combining the economic, social, and environmental objectives to maximize the present human well-being without damaging the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Taking the idea of sustainable development further to the urban scale, it additionally requires identifying social and environmental limitations for human activities associated with cities and matching the design techniques to these limitations. The theory of sustainable urban development suggests a variety of topics which should be focused on in order to ensure a prospective functioning of the city. These are the city's shape and patterns of settlement, transportation and fuel consumption, land use, the conversion of waste into renewable sources, preventing the pollution of urban and regional environments, human rights, equal pay, eliminating the gap between rich and poor, and of course, many, many more. In the following, we will take a closer look on the ecological footprint and its limitation to express sustainability, introduce you to a design guide for sustainable urban development, have a look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and end up with a conclusion. The ecological footprint is a way to measure sustainability. This can be done on different levels of detail, for the whole world, for persons, companies, countries, and, most interesting in our case, for cities. So, how does the calculation actually work? Just as a bank statement tracks income against expenditures, the ecological footprint accounting measures the ecosystem's supply of resources and services and tracks it against the population's demand. On the supply side, there is a city, state, or nation's biocapacity. It represents its biologically productive land and sea area, including forest lands, grazing lands, cropland, fishing grounds, and built-up land. On the demand side, the ecological footprint measures the population's area demand for plant-based food and fiber products, livestock and fish products, timber and other forest products, space for urban infrastructure and built environment, and also for forest to absorb its carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. If the total ecological footprint is larger than its biological capacity to replenish its renewable resources and absorb the resulting waste products and pollution, it is said to have an ecological deficit. In other words, the ecological footprint measures how fast we consume resources and generate waste, which is compared to how fast nature can absorb our waste and generate new resources. To visualize this on a global scale, we calculate the available biocapacity for each country per person, here shown in green, and subtract the ecological footprint for every country per person. The result is a map that shows the ecological deficits and reserves of a country. This visualization needs to be approached in a critical way though. Let's take for instance Canada. Even though this country has an ecological reserve, does that mean it is appropriate to consume as much energy as they do? No, it is not. If everyone in the world consumed as much as the Canadians, we would need 4 planets to meet our demands. We can now also map the correlation between the Human Development Index and the ecological footprint. Interestingly, in the whole world there is no country that has both a very high human development and a living within our planet's resource budget, and only few countries meet 2 of the key minimum conditions for global sustainable development. Let's get down from the global scale to the urban scale. When comparing countries and cities' ecological footprints, it turns out that cities on average have a bigger footprint per person, which is why it is important to tackle sustainability in cities. Taking for instance Cairo, the footprint per capita is around 1.6 times of the national average and nearly 6 times as big as the country's biocapacity per capita. Even more stunning is the case of Greece. Athens' urban ecological footprint is 22% bigger than all of the biocapacity available in Greece. So, obviously, the ecological footprint of a city gives an indication of an urban problem. These problems can be clustered in the following measurable categories: structural problems, environmental problems, recycling problems, and energy problems. Nonetheless, there are problems the ecological footprint cannot cover very well. Above all, this applies to the social problems, like shown in the following example. Let's recall how many cities in the past developed. Imagine a street crossing at which trade takes place. The crossing is attractive as a place to gather, to exchange goods and information, which is why people start to settle down. In the beginning, the street functions as a friendly servant of the city, attracting more and more people. Throughout the growth process, the function of the street evolves to transportation only. The street itself will become a burden to the city, separating the quarters, making exchange between them difficult, representing the imperial master of the city. This development is of course not limited to streets only. Other transportation infrastructure like harbors, railways, and recently even airports show similar developments. Nonetheless, the imperial master does not have to be the final stage of the process. The past shows that large traffic infrastructure in cities, when they exceed the available space, can and should be moved outside the city, leaving room and potential for new development. The interesting question is now, is it possible to avoid in advance that traffic structures become breakers of the city? Talking in terms of transportation, infrastructure is needed that can move many people by consuming as few space as possible. Another attempt is to build infrastructure in a way that it doesn't separate the city. Therefore, constructions in a 3-dimensional space can solve problems which can't be solved on a 2-dimensional grid. The question is now, how do we design sustainable cities? This includes both the prevention of climate change and the adaptation to occurring natural disasters triggered by climate change. To answer these questions, the World Bank Group published a guide which gives planning and design recommendations for different environmental scenarios. We will now have a look at one scenario. Getting warmer days and fewer cold ones will result in a variety of consequences for the cities, such as a higher demand for cooling and a declining air quality. This is affecting the energy sector and the public health of cities everywhere. Suggested solutions are therefore investments in urban ventilation and clean energy. The World Bank Group proposed many more design suggestions for different scenarios, which can be found in their Guide to Climate Change, Adaptation in Cities. The importance of adopting sustainability in our plans is very clear. A good example of that are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are aiming to end poverty, protect the planet and ensure prosperity for all. These were adopted in 2015 by the United Nations countries. Focusing on our topic of sustainable urban development, we can refer to goal number 11, titled Sustainable Cities and Communities Make Cities and Human Settlements Inclusive, Safe, Resilient and Sustainable. This goal has 10 targets in order to develop our cities and communities in a more sustainable manner by the year 2030. The first target is ensure access for all to adequate, safe and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums. The second is to provide access to safe, affordable and sustainable transport systems for all, improving road safety, notably by expanding public transport. The third is to enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries. The fourth is to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. The fifth is to significantly reduce the number of deaths and the number of people affected by disasters, including water-related disasters, with a focus on protecting the poor and people in vulnerable situations. The sixth is to reduce the adverse per capita environmental impact of cities, including by paying special attention to air quality and municipal and other waste management. The seventh is to provide universal access to safe, inclusive, green and public spaces. The eighth is to support positive economic, social and environmental links between urban, peri-urban and rural areas. The ninth target is set to be reached already by 2020, which is to substantially increase the number of cities and human settlements adopting and implementing integrated policies and plans towards inclusion, resource efficiency, mitigation, adaptation to climate change, and resilience to disasters. And the last target is to support least developed countries, including through financial and technical assistance in building sustainable and resilient buildings and utilizing local materials. To come to our conclusions, a sustainable city can be the basis for achieving the goals of sustainability and welfare of citizens, restoration of civil rights, social justice, and human development. It makes the improvement of environmental quality and the optimal distribution of urban services and facilities possible in order to increase social satisfaction. It aims to standardize design with climate protection and restoration of urban environment, lifting the quality of life in the city to the desired level to cover all environmental, economic, and cultural measures. Thank you for your attention.